How many roads must a man walk down?
We're going to have a break. So we're really happy to have Clare Brown with us today. Clare Brown is of course the founder of Sarawak Report, which has exploded in audience reach lately, hundreds of thousands. Could you tell us whether Sarawak Report has started off with the intention of being a whistleblowing website?
No, absolutely not. But I guess if you're someone who's spent all your life being an investigative journalist, you can't help what you are. And so maybe I didn't start with that intention. In fact, I guess I started by trying to bring to global media the situation in Malaysia, in Borneo in particular. It's a global issue. The destruction of one of the biggest rainforests in the world is a global issue, which is why I thought people would be interested. But so many of these globally important issues, the Western media don't pick them up. And I was having real problems getting sufficient interest in what was going on in Malaysia. And, after a while I started to think, why am I bothering to talk to foreigners? Why don't I talk to Malaysians and see if they're interested? Because it's their country. And in the end, if anything is going to change in Malaysia, it's going to be because Malaysians changed it. I started writing with a view to joining in, that growing internet debate. And lo and behold, people were interested, actually. So I realised I was on the right track because I was talking to the people who were directly concerned. I mean, even if the whole world should be concerned about Borneo, they don't run it. So it was the people living there who have to make the real decisions that were immediately interested. And so I grew from there, really. And looking at the driving factors behind what was causing so many unnecessary problems in Sabah and Sarawak. You have a rich country there, a small population, so there's plenty for everyone if it was done, with everyone in mind, and more. But that wasn't what was happening. So, of course, the driving problem was corruption in political high places. So I started investigating that.
Are you the only one running it? So the 1MDB scandal is really complex. So in very simple terms, based on what Sarawak Report has exposed, could you tell us what for sure we know happened?
Yes, I hate saying things are complicated because it's the job of a journalist to say they're really simple. So to simplify the 1MDB problem, I think what you see is an intent from the very beginning. It was presented as a wonderful vehicle to bring development to Malaysia, and it was presented as a vehicle for bringing Arab money to invest in Malaysia to bring Malaysian jobs. But there was a separate intention, and the separate intention was actually to suck money secretly out of the Malaysian public funds and into the hierarchy of Malaysia, who felt they needed more money in order primarily to keep control and, as we've also seen, to furnish the lifestyles to which they think they should become accustomed. So no money from the Arab countries has gone into Malaysia through 1MDB, but a number of so-called joint ventures with supposed Arab countries have acted as a fig leaf for ventures that enabled the finance minister to borrow billions of dollars, much of which has gone missing. And that's where it gets complicated, smoke and mirrors, how did the money get missing? It's quite simple if you don't have to have proper transparency in your accounts. If you can write in your accounts things like, we raised 3 billion and 1.4 billion of it actually we didn't spend on the project, we raised it for, we spent it on repayments and running costs. No more details. If you can get away with that level of transparency, it's easy to make money disappear. So that's simply how 1MDB has lost everybody's money. It's just not delivered its accounts in a proper fashion, and it's got away with it because the way Malaysia's run, you can't complain about these things.
So two ministers, Dr. Saleh Kerouac and Abdurrahman Dahlan, are certainly not your biggest fans. They say that the documents and the exposures that you've given were blatant lies and distorted truths.
These are the guys who jumped up after Najib had to sack their predecessors because the predecessors were being a little bit too believing. Are these the guys?
Yeah.
Are these the guys who told us that Lester Milani's master forger, who turned out to be a bus driver, are these the guys who believed Lester Milani? Well, I mean, what can I say? Who has the credibility here? I've provided factual evidence that has been sufficient to interest the regulators of a number of countries who are looking into 1MDB at the moment. So perhaps Mr. Dahlan should start thinking of providing some evidence of his own to substantiate his libelous allegations that Sarawak Report has been printing untruths.
So you were an investigative journalist before, and arguably still are. How do you verify the documents that you receive?
Goodness, well, every single thing I print has to be verified. If not, then I'm in danger of being taken to court, aren't I, and exposed as a libelous publication. So, you know, I have to take that every time, and you know, I'm just me. I have my own resources. Every time I print something, I take that risk on my head. You know, my house, my family. I have to take that risk. So, you know, if I'm wrong, take me to court, because there's no one who's more concerned about getting things right than me.
So if Prime Minister Najib were to grant you one honest answer, what would be the first question that you would ask him?
Who does Good Star belong to? Because 1MDB has said that it belonged to Petrosaudi. Petrosaudi has said it's belonged to Petrosaudi, but all the documents and all the evidence show that it belonged to Joe Lowe, single shareholder. What has Najib got to say to that?
So that would be
my first question, because it's a simple one, isn't it? And it's at the hub of it.
Okay, so Interpol had recently rejected the Malaysian police's red notice application against you in August, but the Star had reported that they are yet again filing the same application. So the allegation was that the activities of Sarawak Report were detrimental against parliamentary democracy. Would you say that that's the main aim of Sarawak Report?
A free press is fundamental to the existence of a parliamentary democracy. All of us here in the West have concerns that even our media is not as free as it can be, and therefore that diminishes democracy. But you know, the complaints we have pale into insignificance when you look at the situation of the press in Malaysia. And all that I am producing through Sarawak Report is a modicum of free press. And so therefore, my activities are totally contributory towards parliamentary democracy, which does not in fact exist under Najib Razak in Malaysia. He knows it. I mean, why accuse me of the thing he is most guilty of?
So in January this year, the Star Online reported that the then Prime Minister, Duma Hadi, had an interview with Sarawak Report.
Yes.
Could you tell us what was discussed?
Well, I reported it first, of course. It was quite a coup. In fact, I was so surprised I got the interview that I forgot to take a photograph. And I left the interview and I suddenly realised I hadn't taken a photograph of me and Mahathir, so I had to ask permission from his staff, and I had to wait for an hour and a half to be allowed to get back in and quickly take a photograph. Most of the interview was taken up by me asking about the situation in Sarawak, because he had actually started to make some statements that showed that he was concerned about the dam building programme in Sarawak, which is obviously my big fundamental issue, you know. So I probably bored him for the best part of my allocated time with questions about Sarawak's environmental issues. And I was heartened that he was being a lot more flexible on those matters than he had been when he was in power. And indeed, the following week, he went back to Sarawak to and talked about the alternative microdam technology that could bring power badly needed by local isolated communities, you know, which is what supposedly this whole dam building exercise is about. So he, you know, so that was what I talked about, and then of course I took my opportunity towards the end of the interview to ask him about 1MDB, and he was he came up with a couple of good quotes which I immediately rushed off and used.
Could you share some of the fondest memories that you have of Sarawak?
Yeah, well, I guess everyone remembers their earliest childhood, you know, and it was a very beautiful, lush place. We moved up to North Borneo, which Sabah, when I was 4. So you know, that's my most memories are in what was Jesselton in those days, Kota Kinabalu, which in those days was very undeveloped, very beautiful, lovely coral reef. Climbed Kinabalu, you know, fitted in with all the local kids there. We all went to the same school. So I have very fond memories, and you know, I knew then that this was a very special, precious place.
Were you a nature-loving kid?
Yeah, well, there wasn't much else to do, you know. I mean, if you grow up in Borneo, you better be interested in nature, because let's face it, that's what it's all about. So yeah, I was a great tree climber, and you know, I climbed up Mount Kinabalu. I was always, you know, there wasn't any TV, so you used to look at the insects, you know. So yeah, I think all the kids in that part of the world have a beautiful connection with nature that my kids growing up in a city never did. And most kids on the planet these days grow up in cities, and they don't understand plants, they don't understand animals, you know. They think they're alien things that don't, you know, matter to their lives, but of course our habitat is still the earth, and you know, we've become divorced from how important it is to keep our habitat alive, and we're killing our habitat. So this is an issue that, you know, that I found very important, and obviously I was emotionally connected to, because I had that very early childhood where I learnt to love plants and animals.
So after returning to Sarawak after that many years, how has the rainforest changed for you?
I actually can't even talk about it. It's such a tragic thing. It's so shocking. And so shocking to see how bereft the people are who lived there. I mean, you know, they needed help, you know, and they were, I suppose for want of a better word, they were primitive in some ways. There were definitely things that the wider society could have done for people living in the jungle, but it hasn't been done for them. You know, they've just had everything taken, and they're still sitting there, and they're basically being told, if you want to live there, you know, starve. Otherwise, come and, you know, live in a shanty on the edge of Miri and see what you can get off the rubbish heap. That's been the offer from the logging and plantation industries to the local people of Sabah and Sarawak, and it's a scandal.
What do you think is the cause of that?
Greed. Insane greed by a few people who saw that they could control the country purely for their own benefit, and so they did. They had a choice. They could have been benevolent and generous and honourable rulers, but they sadly took the criminal path and stole everything for themselves.
In the 16th International Anti-Corruption Commission, the current Sarawak Chief Minister, Adnan Satin, had actually defended the then Chief Minister, Taib Mahmud's administration. If you were to grade his report card, how would you grade his current administration?
If I was to create his administration?
Grade. Grade. So how would you...
Grade his administration? He has a major problem in that he is appointed by Taib. He spent his life working for Taib, and he's irretrievably part of that household regime. So even if he wants to change things, it's very difficult, because he's changing from within. And I think, you know, really, it needs a clean sweep. That's what I think. On the other hand, he knows that he has to at least accept that Taib is utterly discredited, and that many of the things that Taib has been trying to push through economically in Sarawak are, you know, utterly discredited. For example, the mega dam project. So he's made some gestures. He's acknowledged the problems. Let's see. Let's see if he takes that further step and actually succeeds in solving some of the problems. I mean, it would mean depriving an entire structure of which he's part of, you know, their very comfortable sources of income, and he might find that hard.
So, how terrible is this Taib Mahmud person?
Terrible? He's just a crook, wasn't he? But he was, he was, you know, and he is a crook, and I'm saying that because I know he daren't sue me, because it's there for all to see. And it's very sad that someone who has so much power should have utilised it purely to benefit himself and a few people around him who he needed to you know, pay off in order to keep his position. And in the process, he has destroyed the third largest rainforest in the world, and he has built up a network of timber companies that have benefited from Sarawak finances to cause the same kind of trouble all over the world. Sarawak Malaysian timber companies are three of the 5 biggest in the world, and they are certainly amongst the most ruthless and damaging and corrupting. And these companies have gone into the Congo. They're causing trouble in the Amazon, Papua, Indonesia. They've been spearheading their model everywhere, and so therefore they're a global menace. In that respect, Taib Mahmud might seem to be just a little, you know, tin pot dictator in a lost part of the world, but actually he's been allowed to get away with far too much and to become far too rich and dangerous for the rest of the world to ignore.
So the work that you have done in Sarawak were lauded by Evening Standard as giving the 2.5 million oppressed people a choice. Would you sometimes say that the work to save that condition is just lonesome and nearly impossible?
Well, you know, I'm just a journalist. So where do I fit in here? You know, someone who becomes a journalist has not become a politician. So in the end, what a journalist does is provide something. We provide information to the body politic, and so that the body, which is a resource for the body politic on which they act. It's a resource for people to make demands of their politicians. So if they, you know, and so I think because I haven't been controlled in the way that the media is controlled in Sarawak, so I'm someone who was in a position that I could reasonably safely, cover these issues from a distance, thanks to the world technology we now have. This information has now been made available, and you know, I suppose I couldn't have hoped for better in terms of reach. A, people were interested. B, they've taken on board what I've written, and they're acting on it. I mean, you know, we're now seeing a Prime Minister who's on the defence. We've seen Tide move to one side. People know what's going on now in Malaysia. That's my job as a journalist. You know, I don't have any other role. Clearly, I would like to see, you know, reform in Malaysia, because I think that's what most people would like to see.
You're also the founder of a Radio Free Sarawak. What is it that Radio Free Sarawak tries to achieve?
Well, to do the same thing. You know, you can switch on your internet if you're in Miri or Cebu. You can't do that if you're in the middle of a jungle in an isolated kampong. So the radio is attempting both to bring information, which they were not getting. I mean, you know, and also to give those communities a voice, and that possibly even more important, because those communities are living isolate. You know, they know something terrible has happened to their jungle. What they're finding out thanks to my radio is that the same thing is happening to a different tribe on another side of Sarawak. That this is, you know, so that they have a united interest, that they start to understand that. They can also ring into our radio and express their problems and get a voice. And how nice, finally, for these people who've been totally ignored, terrified. I mean, logging gangs are about the most terrifying thugs, you know, in the world. They have very frightening weaponry, they have people that hang on and enforce. I mean, there's been a lot of real terror down on the ground in Sarawak for these communities, you know. And now at last they can actually at least find some, you know, some way of saying what's happened to them that gets out so that other people can hear them too. It's a long way from them being able to maybe vote for who they would like in an election, because, you know, there are all sorts of processes going on in Sarawak that keep control of that country.
Are there some comforting stories that you've heard through Radio Free Sarawak?
Every day, stories come up from villages, and you know, they're very much along the same patterns. That their land's been taken. Places that they had used to grow fruit or forage for food, suddenly in comes an enormous American caterpillar truck and destroys it. And then, of course, you know, they try to maybe take some legal redress, and maybe 20 years later, maybe they'll win their case, you know, and get nothing compensation, and it's all gone and has been for 20 years. So there's no justice, and these stories come up all the time. They're, you know, they're beginning to stand up for their rights. I mean, you know, we see what happened with the Barham Dam blockade. You know, I think that Radio Free Sarawak has played an important role in those sorts of grassroots active campaigns, because the people hear what's going on. They know that every day, you know, it's been over 2 years now, they know that every day the radio is there, at least to follow what they're doing, to give them a voice, to feed back to other people. So at last, you know, it plays into that. It plays into it. That's the role of communications within a supposed democracy.
So they have been left behind by the current regime for over 50 years.
Deliberately so.
Would you say that a change of government is the only way forward, that they would have a chance again?
Well, I think that, of course, should Adnan Satem, or you know, if anyone wished to bring reform, of course they could, particularly in a place like Sarawak, where so much power resides in the centre. It's like telling a fat person to go on a diet, isn't it? Tricky, but possible.
How are you enjoying your retirement?
My retirement?
Yeah.
Oh, perhaps you better ask me that in a few years.
Okay. So the work that you have done have been really instrumental, from the deforestation to Sarawak right up to 1MDB. What is it that constantly motivates you to keep doing what you're doing?
Well, I feel a sense of responsibility now, having got going with this. You know, I can see that certainly at the moment, you know, what I'm doing is useful. And so that, and you know, so I would feel very badly to walk away from that. But then I'm also very aware that, you know, Malaysia is full of people who have the ability to do what I'm doing. And if I can at least inspire some people to sort of take up this work, and to realise that journalism, and I'm not speaking only of Malaysia here, because you know, all over the world I worry about journalism becoming too much of a recycling of, you know, government press statements and PR releases, you know. That's not what journalism is there for. It's boring for a start. You know, journalism should be challenging. It should be a bit cheeky. It should be rude. It should take risks. It should. Because we're here, you know, as long as you put the well-being of your audience, and the people to whom you are mandated, which is the public, first, you should be doing these things. And as long as your intentions are honest and not, you know, bought or perverted or biased, you know, you should actually stick your neck out as a journalist. So, you know, I hope to see, and I think, you know, I think we've seen, you know, I think we see that catching on a bit in Malaysia now. You know, there's a very lively online media in Malaysia, and good on them, you know, and I hope that, you know, I would be really delighted to retire to watch, young Malaysian journalists, expanding a free press.
So Prime Minister Najib has asked white people to stop meddling in internal affairs, and a lot of your work had centered in Malaysia. What is that special attachment that you have towards Malaysia?
Well, if Najib is going to ask white people to stop meddling in Malaysian affairs, perhaps he should sack the white person who's running his press office and communications office. Because if he can have a white press officer, then why not have a white journalist countering some of the stuff that's untrue that comes out of that press office? I was born in Sarawak, so I care about the issues. We live in a world where people move and travel, and if you come to Britain or go to America, there are people of all origins doing great work and finding roles. So this has to work both ways, doesn't it? We invite people into our societies on grounds of merit, and so that should be. And likewise in our global world, Najib really can't complain if somebody wants to write about him. I mean, people don't have to read Sarawak Report. And if what I'm writing isn't useful, they won't read it. If what I'm writing is a dubious truth, people won't bother with it. I mean, that's the way it is. So if I'm causing Najib a problem, then he should be wondering, whether it's not, he shouldn't be reforming the issues that I'm writing about. Being racist towards me only just it alerts the rest of the world to something that people living in Malaysia are already well aware of, which is that Najib, who pretends to be, a modern cosmopolitan kind of a leader, actually uses race, religion, and these sorts of issues that should not be divisive. He uses them to divide his country. It's, in a very despicable way.
But all that you have done had not come without a personal cost. There are death threats, deportation, defamation campaign, even stalking against you. Would you say that all of these were worth it?
Yeah. There's a lot of... defamation is the big one. A lot of money has been put into hiring PR companies, and trying to sort of hacking companies, to try and find out things about me which can then be somehow used to throw doubt on me. And I mean, the reason for doing this is so obvious that but yeah, it's very stressful to have that happen. It's very stressful to think that you're being recorded, that your private emails are being hacked. Every now and again, I mean, there's a new PR company that's just been hired, ringing around journalists again in London, trying to get them to write negative stories about me here in the UK media. That's a big target of the Malaysian government, because if they can get just one bad story about me here in the UK, then they can say to the Malaysians, look, even in the UK they've dismissed her, So I know what they're doing and why they're doing it. But it's very, very low tactics, and I have to fight it. It's very tiring.
So are there any regrets?
No, I don't know, because I think when I first decided I would try and write about the situation in Sarawak, because I just felt it was the right thing to do, and I didn't know if I could help in any way, but at least I would have tried to help. And so I thought, I could live with my conscience, and I had a real conscience about what had happened in Sarawak and in Borneo, and the more I found out, and in Malaysia, where, I've been on a journey of discovery about what has secretly been going on in Malaysia, beneath a pretty good international image. So yeah, I felt at least I could, I could do something.
But you could have opted out so easily from all of these that you were getting.
Yes, but I'm one of the few people not living inside Malaysia, you know, who had a better idea of what was going on. And I had a very good idea of just how disastrous the whole-scale, unrestrained destruction of Borneo was. You know, it's a very remote place. Most people in the corridors of global power don't really understand what was going on in Borneo. So you know, I mean, you've got 2 months ahead of you now of haze in Malaysia. You know, that's just the slight repayment, you know, message for what has been done there. And so I did feel very responsible, but I was somebody who knew how bad things were, who had potentially the ability to get some attention on the subject. So I felt I had to at least do what I could.
So, were you involved in any protests or youth politics when you were younger?
No, not really, no. You know, everyone around me was, you know, it was a sort of time of the 60s, or late 70s really. So there were lots of things going on in those days, you know, marches against racism, marches against, you know, police brutality, you name it. You know, it was a very fizzy time. Well, you remember, I mean, I was at the LSE not long after, you know, the whole time when the LSE was a hotbed of radicalism. You know, everybody's sort of sitting out their weekends with banners and things. That was, you know, a much more active mentality among students then, I think, than you see now. But no, I wasn't at all, you know, I'm very active. I was a historian.
In an interview with Esquire, you said that the youth nowadays are just too deferential. Why do you think this is the case?
I think things go in waves. I think things go in pendulums. And, you know, a lot of the battles were fought in the 60s and 70s and conceded. And then it became, you know, really a battle for, you know, every young person growing up now is that what's their biggest worry? That they're going to make their parents proud, they're going to do well in life, you know, and so they're you know, they get to university and their big target is to make a success. So they're not wanting to stand up or protest or, you know, and that's a sign, I guess, that you know, a lot of the things that are troubling people have been going away. But I see that changing again. I think the pendulum is now coming back because I think that attitude has, you know, created its own problems. And I think, you know, I think everyone's waking up to lots of global problems of inequality, secret, you know, manipulation of global structures so that only a very few are doing well out of the systems we have now. And I think we will see more and more people putting their foot down and saying, actually, we're going to have to say enough's enough. So yeah, I think we'll probably see more lively student protests in the next coming period. It's natural swing.
But do you think it's a good thing that they're involved in politics?
Yes, if you don't want to get kicked around, you have to be ready to stand up for your rights and your liberties. Otherwise, people will want to take them because, you know, it's always, you know, there's always a lot of money to be made for certain individuals if they can get in a situation where they can exploit everybody else. You know, and you know, you see slavery rising in the world. You see slavery emerging as a very big problem in Malaysia. Effective slavery. That's what people will do to each other. Unless others stand up and insist on, you know, on protecting our rights.
The intimidation and threats against Malaysian students are really real, and there's a sense of helplessness with corruption being normalized in that country. Drawing from the courageous work that you have done, how important do you think is the value of courage for the young people today?
Yeah, if you're not prepared to stand up and unite. And uniting is very, very important. I mean, what I do see in Malaysia is, you know, and particularly among the young people of all segments of society, you know, that there's a united feeling, you know, that this is not right, that things need to be reformed. And so, you know, don't bow down, because otherwise you will be exploited. So at some stage, people have to say, enough. And when you see the Basé movement, for example, you see that that's happening. And rulers have to take note at that stage. So I would say, yes, you have to make a decision. Are you going to be entirely selfish? Just look out for yourself. However bad things get, you hope that you will be one of the winners. Or are you going to stand with your fellow generation and say, no, we want a society that's run by the principles of law and fairness.
Has a lot of people spelled Clare wrongly?
Well, there are two ways to spell it. Mine doesn't have an I.
Yeah, noticed that. So, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Well, I really hope that your project, flourishes, and I really take your point from your last question, which is, should we be sticking our necks out as students, very privileged here in the UK? Should we be keeping our heads down as we are being warned, given how, real the threats are? Or do we quietly and doggedly unite and, stand up for what everyone knows is right? All I can say is, if you don't stand up for what's right, then you will too become a victim. And there have been certain times where, across the world we all stood up against tyranny, in the last world wars, and we have better, freer societies as a result of having taken universally, really big risks to fight tyrannies that had arisen. And it's meant that the generations that came after, which include all of us, we've had a much nicer life. And if you want to keep that nice life, you have to stand up for your rights.